All right. I'm going to show this for a second. Welcome, everybody, to another edition of This Week in Drones, coming to you live every Thursday, 1 p.m. Eastern. We've got a great lineup today. Wanted you to see all our pretty faces there, and then back to us live here in person. We are going to be talking about an audacious topic today, the Golden Dome, that many folks have only just heard about, and actually a handful of us out there didn't even know what it was at all. I had a quick poll that I ran not too long ago here, and some people, I guess a handful of folks never heard of it at all. Everybody has a little bit of a different opinion. What's it going to take? What kind of technology is going to be involved in this Golden Dome missile and drone defense system that the United States is going to be putting into place? Is it going to be DoD focused only? Is it going to be mostly driven from the private sector? Is it going to be both? And we'll deep dive some of those topics today and give you guys a good sense of what it is, what we're even talking about here. So with that, I wanted to thank CUAS Hub. We're going to be posting a green room interview with Mariano Long and Robb Monkman that we recorded just before we went live. So you can get a really awesome view of the background and some of the story and journey of what led up to some of the folks who are involved in the Golden Dome. And also thank you to TEAL for powering this episode, and Robb for being on here, bringing your expertise in communication links, and you can get into some of that background here in a minute, but thank you so much. Appreciate it. And everybody go check out tealcom.io or teal.io as well. So with that said, we'll run through introductions, but then at the end of that, Mariano is going to take us right into just the overall topic. What is the Golden Dome? Time frames, like what people are talking about, and then we'll get some of the expertise from the panel, and then we're live. So please send in questions, comments, thoughts throughout. Even send a note right now as you're sitting here waiting to dive in and get involved as to your take on the Golden Dome. If you have any thoughts right off the bat, any opinions you want to send into the messages, we'll pull them up on the screen as we go, and we'll make this a two-way dialogue. So with all that preamble said, I'm your host, David Lewin, with Echodyne radars. So we focus on that airspace awareness, especially the low altitude, high resolution when it comes to protecting cities and domains regarding drones and these smaller, more agile technologies that are flying out and about around us. So with that said, Brandon, I'll pass it to you. If you don't mind sharing, your quick background and just kind of like initial thought for our audience about the Golden Dome. And Michelle, same thing to you after Brandon. Then Robb, Mariano, will pass it to you, but I'll send it to you, Brandon.
Yeah. Hey everyone, Brandon Youngblood, co-founder and CEO of Drone Security Services, former FAA UAS security and counter UAS manager for the Air Traffic Organization. So specifically for the Golden Dome, I actually don't know a lot about it. I'm very familiar with the Iron Dome and the concept, as that type of concept kept me alive in various military installations across the Middle East. You got CRAM and some of these other very, very sophisticated pieces of technology that shot down mortars all the way, from mortars to ballistic missiles, and now they're looking at hypersonics and et cetera. I guess the whole real premise is to make sure that we have this protective bubble through a network and layered of air defense technologies in order to keep our nation safe through NORAD, which we are partnered with Canada to effectively maintain from our adversarial threats. My biggest question, I guess, on the Golden Dome effort is if or how it would apply to the smaller UAS, Group 1s and 2s. So you're talking very small, kind of the Ukrainian style FPVs, if that's going to account for that, or if this is still more of the traditional hypersonic ballistic missile type threats that they are looking to defeat. So it's really, is it protecting outside in within our sovereign airspace, which goes out 12 nautical miles from the land border of the United States, which is called the ADIZ, the Air Defense Identification Zone, or is this also going to protect domestically, internally from lone wolf style attacks on military installations and civilian infrastructure and whatnot? So very curious to learn more. Like I said, I don't know a lot. So I'm really looking forward to hearing more. Michelle, over to you.
Awesome. And I'll just bring up, thanks for the interaction as well from our listeners. Question that tagged right off of what you said, Brandon, right when you were saying it. He said, will our Golden Dome be similar to the one Israel used to defend against Iran's missiles? So great question. We'll be deep diving that. Thanks for the interaction. Guys, we're live. Send in more questions and thoughts as we go. Michelle, to you.
All right, thank you. Hello, everybody. Good to be back. Michelle Duquette from 3 Mad Air. I am, I guess, in a nutshell, I'm an aviation generalist. I've been in aviation for 35 years, and I've spent probably the last 25 years working alongside the FAA at the headquarters level, mostly for NAS Enterprise, system of systems kind of progression and integration. And my key word is interoperability. If it doesn't all work together, it just makes more challenges. I do specialize in drone and advanced air mobility. I ran that portfolio for however many years before I left my last job at the Meyer Corporation. And I am really wanting to focus on how we connect the two worlds. From the Golden Dome is very broad umbrella, and it has to encompass a lot of big companies, a lot of high altitude airspace, which is a little different world than what we typically deal with in this Drones This Week in Drones podcast. There's a low altitude element that absolutely must be considered in things like this, whether it's, and then drones in general, if it's coming up from underneath the water, or if it's coming in at very low altitudes underneath the radar. These are questions that we have. Is this ecosystem being included, being considered in the Golden Dome concept? I mean, I have the same question for ATC modernization. How are we connecting this low altitude operating environment with the plans for evolving the next ATC system? So I'm hoping today that we're able to bring some of those questions to the both of you, and you can help us understand how our audience can either get engaged or know how to put their comms out in a more meaningful way to help support the Golden Dome overall. Over to you, Rob.
Great, thank you. And thank you, David, for the opportunity. Really excited to be part of this discussion. As it relates to this audience, early in my career, I had the opportunity to work with public safety agencies on the DoD side, the Navy, and the Air Force, pioneering things like radio interoperability, mesh networking. Some of you may know that as MANET or mobile ad hoc networking. I got the opportunity to work on JTRS, Joint Tactical Radio System, on the GNSS routing system. So fast forward to today, I am the Chief Marketing Officer at TEAL, and TEAL is on the connectivity side of things. So I've been here for about 3.5 years. A great way to think about TEAL is that you can rapidly deploy assets worldwide, and you can connect them seamlessly and securely to public, private 5G, hybrid satellite cellular systems to ensure ultra low latency, high redundancy connectivity, especially for mobile or remote technologies that we can talk about today. TEAL's mission critical connectivity enables seamless switching between these different types of networks on demand. It's all over the air, and that helps with, of course, redundancy and flexibility. In the context of the Golden Dome, missile defense system, there are several technologies that come to mind that may require or benefit from cellular or cellular-like connectivity, particularly in C4I, so command and control communications, computers. Obviously, UAVs. Many UAVs rely on TEAL's technology today, but even high-altitude balloons, high-altitude drones, these are acting as sensor nodes, may rely on persistent cellular-like mesh networks to maintain real-time data flow. Airborne platforms will also act as network relays between space assets, Mariano's domain and ground control. Also things like C2, command and control nodes. Things that come to mind are tactical vehicles that could include real-time coordination with interceptors or David with radar systems, edge devices, distributed ground-based sensors, radars, could be networked via secure 5G, satellite cell, hybrid links. to provide rapid target acquisition and tracking, things like that, all the way down to soldier systems, right? So personnel, operating, distributed, missile defense systems may use ruggedized mobile terminals. They may be using private 5G for diagnostics, secure messaging, these sorts of things. And then in some cases, and this is really where Mariano has his expertise, space to ground communications. And while these assets are probably using RF or laser links, some ground relays like fixed or mobile SATCOM ground stations could integrate with terrestrial cellular systems to distribute data across, units, especially in real time. So that's a little bit about TEAL. We're US built, US controlled, we're a secure platform. We really help to mitigate global attack vectors and ensure secure, reliable, always on connectivity for globally deployed assets.
Awesome. Thanks, Rob. And so thank you for inviting Mariano Long to the show as well. I know you guys have known each other for a while and interacted in all these domains that you just mentioned. So Mariano, we'll pass it to you, and just wanted to hear, a brief background, but obviously we deep dive that on the green room. So folks can go listen to that to hear the whole story, but, just kind of touch on what your expertise relates to, how your expertise relates to the Golden Dome. And then let's dive right in for the audience on what is the Golden Dome and kind of go from there.
Yeah, awesome. Well, first, thanks for allowing me to be here today with the team. So Golden Dome, yeah. It's a really cool concept, right? It's really not brand new. The idea of the Golden Dome, which is envisioned to be a multi-layered missile defense system or shield to protect and defend, the homeland. The Space Force and the Air Force and the Army and the other services have been doing a lot of work for a long time to be able to maintain our freedoms here in the United States. But the new concept of Golden Dome to protect against, a wide variety of threats, including ballistic missiles, hypersonics, cruise missiles. The threat is growing. Our adversaries are moving at a pace that is pretty scary. And so we need to be prepared. Internally, as the DoD, we're preparing for, the next few years. The president's come out and said he wants Golden Dome to be operational, within 3 years, which is we're going to do it. As an industry, as the DoD, everyone's kind of marching forward, and that's more than just your big missiles. And I think that's what's really exciting about the leader that President Trump has chosen, General Gutlein, who used to be the commander of Space Systems Command. He was the vice chief of the Space Force. He's an acquirer that understands the threat, which in the acquisitions world of the military, sometimes there's a big fight, right, between acquirers and the operations community. But General Gutlein, I think, is a great pick to be able to carry out this vision to operationalize Golden Dome within 3 years, right? So what is Golden Dome? I think a lot of us are very familiar, or if we're not, our adversaries have very advanced weapon systems that can go very far, very quickly. And we have systems like the space-based infrared system, SBIRS, which is a constellation of satellites flown out of Buckley Air Force Base to protect and defend against the missile warning architecture. But it's more than that, right? The threat is emerging now. There's a system called JADC2, which is essentially the Joint All-Domain Command and Control, which is an initiative by the DoD transforming how we collect and process and share information across all the branches and services. But I think Golden Dome is going to tie in a lot more than your historical missile threat. It's going to be space to space based assets. It's going to be kinetic assets. Recently, we've declassified a lot of things and talked way more openly about the emerging threats from China and others. So I think that General Gutlein's got a really good pulse on. It's not just about targeting and interceptors and shooters. It takes into account cyber. It's going to have to take into account CCAs, combat collaborative aircraft. It's going to have to take into account how we up and downlink data and information and how do we process data? How do we get the things to the end user so they can disseminate it and make decisions quicker? I think it's going to take into account, space domain awareness, which is how do we view other assets on orbit, whether they're cooperative or uncooperative. I could go on and on, but I'll kind of pause there. But I think that the Golden Dome as a whole is about protecting and defending our homeland and also our Five Eyes nations and our allies.
That's great. So I'm kind of curious off the bat to what Michelle said earlier. Our focus, of course, on the podcast here is related to drones, low altitude. We're working with many state, local entities, pretty much all the folks in this panel for different aspects and reasons, are helping these local agencies to defend and protect and to know what's in their low altitude airspace, much like you described what we'll need to be able to do up, all in space, which is a much larger area, but I'm curious, for folks out there listening too, they're probably wondering how they can be involved, if they can be involved. I mean, certainly through the massive DoD integrators, I'm sure they all have contracts already, and some of us are already involved on that side. But from like the commercial side of things, from the state and local side of things, do you see any of that technology that's being deployed today for low altitude coverage and detection and what's friend foe? Like Brandon said earlier too, like at our Air Force bases and different Army bases around, military bases around the U.S. Like someone could, what happened in New Jersey, someone could launch what we were worried about happening in New Jersey. That is, someone could potentially launch drones from nearby and have a lot of impact. So I'm just kind of curious. I know that was like a lot of bits and pieces, but do you have any initial thoughts on like the connection between those two, space and low altitude?
Yeah, yes, sir. It's a really interesting thing and discussion, right? Because warfare has changed. Historically, it's been big, behemoth programs or the primes, the Boeings, the Lockheeds, the Raytheons. But now you have a lot of small businesses and small companies, and the venture community is really backing a lot of small businesses that deal exactly with what you're talking about. But I say it's changed for a reason, because you can take a $200 drone, you can go to the store, you can go to Home Depot and buy a bunch of different chemicals and things, strap it to a drone, and have a high schooler or a 12-year-old or a 20-year-old take that drone and take out a multi-billion-dollar asset. We've seen that in Ukraine. We just saw it in Russia. Who's not to say that, unfortunately, there's not a crazy person that's willing to do that here in the States to a state or a local building or to F-16 that's sitting on a ramp out at a military base. Like, these are the types of things that I think locally we need to be prepared for. And I think, at the DoD as a whole is starting to really think about, because we just saw it a few weeks ago. A small initiative by a few hundred drones taking out billions of dollars worth of assets in Russia. And warfare has become more scrappy. It's become smaller but more impactful. So I don't think it's always about these multi-billion-dollar contracts from the primes. It could be a small little drone company in Colorado or in Seattle or somewhere else, Florida. I think so. We got to think more. How can we as a society protect and defend, locally, and then how can we, make that scale up? In the military, we often learn, how do you think tactically at the lower level? How do you think operationally? And then how do you think at the strategic level? So I think from a strategic perspective, Golden Dome is a strategic initiative, right, for the United States. But then how can we as citizens kind of draw down to more the tactical level and implement, safety practices or more awareness of things that may be flying in our airspace, or, are certain employees asking very inquisitive questions that may be, for alternative reasons. But I think that our society as a whole, is at threat by a lot of our adversaries, whether it's a local airport or it's through cyber means or local drones. So I think that we got to think a little bit more. I think realistically that our adversaries are probably going to do something to provoke, non-DoD people in ways that maybe we historically haven't thought about.
That's great. Yeah, and Michelle, I see you came off mute. I just want to say Brandon is doing a ton of work on consulting for helping folks with, training policies on that. So that's kind of neat. That's really cool to hear you say that as well, that's like ground up, is like helping your employees know to look up when they get out of their car and just look around, like, is anything going on before they walk into the, whatever data center or bank or whatever they're doing. So, and I'm sure Brandon can speak that. And sorry to snag that, Michelle. I just wanted to comment that really quick, but on to you.
That's okay. I think given the delay that I have, that's probably good practice. I'll just come off when I'm ready, and then you can call me when it fits in the sound thing. Mariano, your question. Where do we start? I think we start in places like here, where we are right this second, because what you have been describing, if I just changed a couple of words, is exactly the same kind of discussion this community has been having for the last 12 years at minimum. We have our own challenges with the clueless, the careless, the criminal, the crazy with small drone use.
Yep.
And we do not yet have the state, local, tribal, territorial authority to be able to effectively address those threats, and they are threats in this, or they could very well be, but we don't. We've got to be able to distinguish it's actual threat so that it can be acted on in an appropriate time, in a timely manner. What I am worried about, your world, which is very high altitude, is looking down at our world, the lower altitude. I don't mean condescending wise, I mean altitude wise. You're looking down and saying, you know what, these guys are going to have the same kinds of problems, because the battlefield is different. So these drones that can, as we've just seen, an amazing amount of destruction, and they can be coming at a couple of 100 feet, where we have never had surveillance needs, but we do now. Or they could be coming up from underneath the water. We have a whole different surveillance game that needs to take place that includes the surface and below. So what I'm worried about is that conversation between the two is not necessarily happening in a meaningful way. But by you guys coming on and talking to us, this is exactly what needs to happen. Because we have folks spread out all over the United States who are actively trying to solve those problems with the policy that we have today, and then trying to inform what the policy needs to be tomorrow in order to effectively engage. And if we're out here doing that, and then there's from your world coming down that says, well, we need to do something about that lower altitude piece, I'm worried that we're going to talk right past each other, and neither one of us are going to get something meaningful. So I'm hoping this is a start of ongoing discussions that we can have that allow us to connect those two ecosystems, so that as we're on the ground and we're trying to figure out how to save ourselves and how to protect ourselves, we're feeding that up to you in a way that is meaningful for your purposes, so that when we are getting alerts, we're not peppering you with mosquitoes, but we're actually giving you stuff that's an actionable intelligence. Over.
Yeah, Michelle, I think that's a really good point and perspective, and it's heard loud and clear. Unfortunately, oftentimes we move slow. as a society, and oftentimes it takes a driving factor or a driving force for policies and procedures and things to be put in place to help with some of the things that you're getting at. And by no means do we want anything bad to happen, but oftentimes we are reactive as a society versus being proactive. And I think if we can take a little bit of a more of a proactive approach when it comes to local threats, how do you, the kamikaze drone scenario that you're alluding to, how do we stop that? I think it's by taking some of the practices, the TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures that we use within the military, and having commercialized them a little bit more to protect and defend, a local airport or something, maybe more often. But I think you bring up a very valid point that as a society, I think we need to probably put a little bit more time, energy, and money behind.
Shout out to
Your
some of
logic
the
is sound.
yeah. Oh, sorry, Michelle. Shout out to some of the comments here just real quick. And if you guys have any spinoffs of these, but Roby Sen said companies involved in the Golden Dome include Lockheed Martin, SpaceX, Palantir, Anduril. Whole list there that you can skim through and see in the comments. Thank you, Robbie. And then, he threw in another one that he missed, Raytheon. But appreciate that. And of course, these are big players that have, like we talked about earlier, those mass contracts, and they tend to pull lots of people together on teams. But to Michelle's point, I think there's other smaller ecosystems that are happening in pockets and in places that's starting to proliferate for different reasons, counter UAS, but also to support drone flights for drone as first responder programs, DFR programs in cities. That's becoming very, very popular and widespread now across the US. So it is going to be interesting to see how those two weave together, whether it's with these big players, defense contractors, or others, and what the connection looks like there. There's one or two more comments coming through, but I'll kind of leave it for a second if anyone wants to comment. Looks like Brandon, you came off mute. That's a great way to do it, going on and off, because I see you got a thought. Go for it, Brandon.
Yeah, having lived in the security world for my entire career, I am often viewed as the pessimistic one. As Michelle just rolled her eyes, she's like, "Yep, absolutely." So I'm very critical of a lot of different things. As again, my personal being has depended on a lot of these technologies to work. My concern, just based on the general conversation, is that we are creating this over expectation and this over promise that we are going to solve all problems relating to the UXS, as it's being described in their air, land, and sea, on this Golden Globe concept. So do you think we need to temper some expectation and say, look, there are multiple problems, maybe we need to break these apart? Hypersonics, ballistics, submarine launch type nuclear weapons is one thing, but countering small group 1 and 2 drones domestically within states, targeting high school football stadiums or stuff like that, is a whole separate thing. So should it all be bunched into this one Golden Dome concept, or do we need to say, yes, the Golden Dome is going to focus here, and that leaves these other gaps that maybe we need to create some other programs wrapped around and not put it all under this one general bubble? No pun intended. Pun intended. Pun intended.
Brandon, I think you're spot on. I think Golden Dome is gonna it's a big initiative with hefty goals, hefty timelines, with a hefty budget, right? But I think there's a lot of pieces of it that will be up for other organizations, other 3-letter agencies to play their role. I don't think it's a one-stop shop. I think that General Gutlein will do a really good job of consolidating priorities of what the DoD as a whole needs and wants. And that may include pulling in NASA. That may include pulling in, the agency or the NRO or the MDA or the NSA, et cetera. But, from a kind of bringing it down to more the local level, I think that's probably not going to be the primary focus of Golden Dome. And so there's going to need to be other people that pick up those pieces of the puzzles. And I think to the point of all the companies that were listed, right, the Andurils, the Lockheeds, the Boeings, the Raytheons, the Northrops, there's billions of dollars right now being plugged into the startup industry, this dual use phenomenology right now. So a lot of, at Portal Space Systems, a small business that just raised venture dollars as well as being backed by the DoD, right? It's often, what is your commercial strategy? How are you going to make money as a commercial company? And then also, what is your DoD strategy? And combining that dual use of your platform or of your widget or of your capability is really important, because while any company may have a commercial use case, there may be also use cases for the DoD. So Brandon's point is spot on. I think there's going to be hundreds, if not thousands, of companies like TEAL and others that play a piece of national security, but maybe from more of a local level rather than from more of a macro against China perspective.
Yeah. And here's kind of my point, and I'm glad you said all that, because we're in line with our thinking then. But I don't want to create this false expectation for some that, well, the Golden Dome people are going to go figure out my problems. I don't like, from a local level, right? Like, there are some state law enforcement agencies that are a lot more aggressive than others. Texas has got a definite reputation to be very forward leaning. NYPD is another one, and they're not waiting. They're being aggressive. Some I would say are like, oh no, the Golden Dome's going to solve all my problems, so I don't need to do anything right now. It's someone else's thing, right? So I think that's certainly something we need to make sure to fit and control the expectation management of what Golden Dome is. And then I guess my other question then kind of really plays into, this is the policy thing that DoD's been bouncing around and that I was involved with for a little bit, is the Group 1 and 2 counter UAS mission is what they consider a law enforcement issue, not an air defense issue. So is Golden Dome law enforcement and air defense, or is it just air defense? Because there's a difference and a nuance there, because the DoD doesn't have a law enforcement authority inside of the United States. So if it's only, outside of their military installation. So that comes into the question, is law enforcement have to get into the realm of like these miniaturized air defense business, for lack of a better term, whether that's under the veil of we're going to do a mini Golden Dome within our state, and we're going to leverage maybe National Guard or state police or whatever that is to do something that they've traditionally never had to do. Now, obviously, there's legal implications and hurdles that have to be overcome, but maybe that's another thing that I'm concerned about with the expectation of Golden Dome, is that no, Golden Dome's going to fix all that. We don't need to worry about it. Thoughts on any of that? I'd love.
Yeah, I just want to say before people jump in, Mark Schmidt sent in this comment, second half of it here, we need tiny bubbles in addition to the Golden Dome. So, just again, you're feeling the hair stand up on your neck, prophesying what people are going to be typing in, but it sounds like people are thinking that way. But yeah, I guess Mariano or others, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would say, Brandon, I'll take you back. I think it was 2018, maybe 2019, somewhere in there. I know I was at Buckley Air Force Base, and we were sitting on the ops floor one day.
You were the one, huh?
Yeah, we're sitting in the ops floor, and someone came in, talked to the SOC commander, and goes, "Hey guys, like, we kind of got a problem. There's a bunch of drones flying over the base." And we're like, "Oh crap!" And like, they're hovering over, the bubbles, the golf balls, and different things there on the base. And I remember security forces and the group commander, the wing commander, they all knew about it, right? And we knew about it as operators, and it kind of threw everyone for a little bit of a loop, right? Obviously, they base security forces and protocol, they have their procedures and things to do, but it was a new one. And with the things that are taking place overseas recently, and especially in Ukraine, right? scrappy warfare. And I always try to think like an adversary. If I was an adversary, I would probably be taking some of those TTPs and applying them. You know, if you wanted to be a bad actor and do something bad, that's what you would do here. And so I think, I can't speak for, you know, the military per se anymore, or local law enforcement, because I'm neither, but I think it's definitely an initiative that we need to take seriously and move quickly on, because it's not if it's going to happen. I think it's when, and I don't want to sound negative, but I just think that's the reality of the situation.
Right.
And, you know, I'll use an example that just took place on the 4th of July. I was, you know, at the beach at Newport Beach, and there was 2 drones flying above, and there's crowds of people. And unfortunately, the way that my mind's been trained in the situations I've been in, I'm like, what's that drone doing? Is it just a kid having fun on the beach, or is that someone with mal intent? And you know, who do you call? Is it the local police that take care of that? You know, that's a great question.
Supposed to be. So I want to. So you brought up an interesting point about Buckley. So that was in 2018 and 19, and I don't want to hammer the military too much, but the exact same situation happened in 2023 in November and December at Langley Air Force Base. Why did we not take it seriously enough to do something aggressively enough to prevent a Langley situation? And are we now doing something to prevent? Let's say now it goes and happens at Whiteman, where the B-2s launched out of, you know, to bomb Iran. They're like, oh, hey, now, and the other thing that bothers me is they're out there, you know, hey, here's the B-2 pilot that did the bomb. That's poor operational security to that young pilot, which is unfortunate. I think we need to reassess and evaluate our culture and security specifically for this. Is we talk about it so much, but I've yet to see any actual practical procedural processes and that type of stuff change. So I'm really, really hoping that entities like TEAL and some of these others can drive not only the technology change, but the culture, the processes, the procedures. So I'm not constantly getting yelled at for being pessimistic and a doomsday sayer, right? But, you know, I don't want to see another senseless loss of life for something that we already know we should be protecting against now. So I really, really, to summarize all that, I hope that we can take these lessons learned, there are many of them, and apply them smartly to get those facilities protected. The FBI just arrested yet another person who was planning an attack in Michigan. There was the one in Tennessee. There's the guy that dropped pipe bombs on his ex-girlfriend's house in Alabama. There was the Pennsylvania one. And so these happen more and more and more. And the other part of the Golden Dome effort that I hope they do is enforcing our current laws and regulations that are on the books. You know, we haven't been really good about enforcing those to get to full compliance, which I think would help. You know, let's start at prisons. Let's start in these locations where there's a massive problem. So
I think Brandon, you bring up some good points. I think, you know, from a DoD perspective, and I kind of hit on this earlier, they're looking at more of the strategic side of it for large threats. But I think it's on us as small businesses, as companies, as citizens, as patriots, as Americans, to worry about, you know, the local stuff. I think it's a good opportunity for businesses to emerge. I also think, though, like,
if I can, I just want to throw in one thing real quick. And I think the companies are there. I think we are there. The money needs to pay us the help, right? That appropriations needs to come, because without investment, we all go away and we can't help, right? So without that, and I'll tell you, Michelle and I have been, we left the government relatively the same time, and we haven't seen the actual appropriations, monetary investment in the protection of these things. Conversation only gets us so far. We need that money to follow.
I totally get it. I think that from a strategic level perspective, there's a lot taking place. You know, $25 billion, I think, was what just passed for the initial tranche of funding for the Golden Dome initiative. I could be wrong about that, but I believe that's what I read. I think At the local level, I think, unfortunately, until there are events that take place that affect John Q. Public and affect your cousin or my brother or your sister, we're not going to take it seriously. And I don't say that to be pessimistic, but I think that's the reactive culture that we have versus being proactive that I kind of alluded to earlier. But it's also going to take, small businesses like our Portal Space Systems to have that dual use technology. Hey, we want to secure and help the maneuverability on orbit through LEO to cislunar. But while we're doing that, what is the, DoD advantages of being able to maneuver without regret or have dynamic space operations on orbit? You can take those same principles and apply them to the air or to the sea or to drones or to underwater vehicles. So I think it's going to take companies like Anduril and others to really push the envelope and kind of stick their neck out and say, we want to help be a part of this protect and defend.
I definitely want to double click on that before we leave that topic, which is dual use, because that is very relevant to our listeners and to even like Echodyne directly as well. That's exactly what we're seeing is, we've got our whole military side of the fence with our radar systems, and that can roll up to Golden Dome type concepts for using it for targeting other things that radars can be used for on that side. But the same tech is being deployed through my team, which is the commercial team, within Echodyne to these state and local folks. We're putting them. I'm right now in Arkansas at a corrections event. Talking to folks that have prisons that have contraband coming in via drones, which we talk about on this podcast a lot. But I'm taking that military grade technology and really helping to commercialize it, make it, affordable and palatable, and however, mixing with new sort of Andurils, but of the commercial space, really tech savvy, smaller shops that are willing to do that integration and put it all together. And so that's starting to proliferate, as I mentioned, at cities and counties and law enforcement agencies all over the country right now are deploying radars, other technologies. I'm sure, Rob, you're seeing this as well. And actually, if you want to speak to this on the TEAL side of the house, I'd be interested to hear. But yeah, I just think that's a great takeaway. Make your product dual use so you can support something like the Golden Dome, this massive project, DoD based, work with like the Andurils of the world, and that same tech can support these state local initiatives. That's brilliant, right? But yeah, Rob, I'll just let you, if you want to speak to that, and then I know Michelle and Brendan seemed like you both had thoughts already, but
no, I 100% agree, and I commend Echodyne's efforts on both sides, on the commercial and the public sector side. I think it was mentioned earlier, our stadiums, our schools, they're all under threat for this type of attack to happen, and to know that you've got counter UAS, you've got your radars at our football stadium here locally or baseball field, things like that are going to need to happen to help to mitigate the risk that's out there. Speaking to dual use, that's certainly something that I agree wholeheartedly needs to happen. TEAL specifically started out on the commercial side, right? So we worked with large organizations that needed secure, reliable cellular connectivity. But then we're able to take what we've produced and proven out on the commercial side and apply it to the defense side, to different applications. And that also helps to harden our product, to develop things that maybe weren't there before, so that we can deliver not just secure, reliable, flexible connectivity across different types of networking technologies now, not just public networks, but private networks and satellite and hybrid sat-cell types of networks, because that type of capability is needed. And in addition to that, we've learned, especially just this past year, from folks like Mariano, that giving folks a common operational picture of the devices that are out there that are online and active and are friendly versus devices that may have been compromised from things like SIM hijacking, which we don't talk a lot about. And we don't need to get too far into this, but as far as SIM technology is concerned, one big threat that isn't talked about often is just the backdoors through SIM technology. Just like your iPhone and your smart devices, 97% of SIM technology is produced by foreign entities. And those four entities may be friendlies, they may be adversarial, but a lot of them are developing their technology in areas like China. And, unfortunately, there are some gaping back door holes that exist. And at TEAL, one thing that we've recognized that we can help to shore up as a wholly owned US platform are some of those back doors. It's never foolproof, but we're all about mitigating those risks.
That's great. And folks, thanks again for TEAL powering this episode as well. Go check out tealcom.io, you guys, to learn more about it. And yeah, Brandon, you're off mute. And then Michelle, I know you had something to say as well. I just really wanted to touch on that dual use piece, but you guys can take it to the next.
No, I'm so interested in the cyber aspect of this, because I'm an old school, air defense thinking kind of person. I think hypersonics, ballistics, all that traditional stuff, but the application of a Golden Dome into the cyber realm is fascinating, and that's super cool, and that's incredibly complex, because you're not only working with military, which is rather straightforward and simple, but the various corporate espionage and the IP protection and getting into those is like, how do you create a national strategy around the corporate protection and some of that? That's a fascinating thing I didn't even think of. So yeah, that's incredible.
I think that.
Sorry, Mariano. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think that's something that is really cool about General Gutlein, is he's thinking about it from a holistic approach, not necessarily only like the kinetic side of things, because some of the points, the backdoor opportunities that our adversaries choose that Robb was talking about, cyber is just as important, if not as more important, as the bomb or the missile or the satellite or the payload itself or the drone, right? The cyber domain is so fast, it's so cheap, it's so it's cheap to cause a lot of effect. It's not cheap to protect and defend against. It's actually very expensive. But there's so many ways our adversaries are trying to create havoc without even having to necessarily physically do something kinetically. And so making your systems or your systems of systems protected against cyber threats is something that is increasingly growing, right? And it doesn't need to be big behemoth tier 1 DoD programs. How do we, secure our cell phone? Maybe it's through a TEAL chip. Or how do we secure our grid infrastructure? How do we secure our water plants? How do we secure our airports, right? All of these things are things we need to be thinking about, because our adversaries are putting together con-ops and plans to do a lot of damage really quickly that may not be through your traditional kinetic or bang means. And so cyber, I think, I have a bunch of colleagues that have spent a lot of time in offensive and defensive cyber operations. That's just as important as the bunker bomb that was just dropped.
Well, didn't they say, or at least I saw someone post that after taking out a lot of the nuclear capability, Iran is probably just turning to strengthen their cyber capability. I mean, because it's sort of chicken and the egg, and squash one and then the other one pops up as this where they put the resources. So
yeah, I'll use a real world example, and I know General Gutlein publicly has talked a lot about this. Imagine I say a day, but imagine 30 seconds without GPS. Most people think that GPS is, it's my Google Maps, it's Waze, it's, things to be able to get me from point A to point B. But GPS, is controlling our credit cards, our street lights, our banking systems, all of our connectivity, airports, our cell phones, anything that has a timestamp associated with it, right, is GPS enabled. So from a space-to-space perspective, like at Portal Space Systems, we plan on helping our DoD protect and defend against assets that may or may not want to do things on orbit to critical infrastructure like GPS. But then as you draw that down, right, how do we protect and defend our systems, our local drone, our local airport, our grid system, our chip in our phone, to protect and defend against normal day in and day out operations that if someone with malintent really could tap into. and so the NSA and other organizations spend a lot of time trying to protect daily Americans from that cyber threat, because it's real and it's out there.
Well, a big controversial one that we talk about a lot in this space is DJI drones, and limiting their use in public sector, which is there's very heated debate over this, because is there a way to harden them using a chip or whatever, but others really strongly believe that there's backdoors and other things built in it. So I don't mean to stir the beehive. I'm sure folks listening right now probably sit on one or the other side of that fence, but that's an interesting topic. I think that relates directly to this.
I'll use a real world example that I personally experienced when I was at one of my bases. We were using, in the military, you plug in a CAT card into your computer, and that CAT card allows you to get into your computer system. Essentially, the CAT card reader that I had plugged my CAT card into was bugged. And we bought those from an approved vendor, right? But at the end of the day, that approved vendor, there was a back door, and somehow it slipped through the cracks, and that $6 little USB connector that plugged into the computer or whatever, so you can get into it, was able to get into a multi-billion-dollar weapon system and do a lot of damage just through about a $6 CAC reader. So if that's happening at military bases, do we think that that's not happening at local hospitals? Do we think that that's not happening at local airports? And so I think it's just creating a culture and an environment, not where we need to live scared, because we don't, but we need to live realistically, that there are people that want to take away the freedoms that this great country offers. And they're trying to do it through a plethora of means.
Michelle? I mean, well said, Mariano.
So I want to pull all of this together for us. So first, let me apologize for my technical difficulties. Speaking of all the technology, I should have engaged more. I would have loved to engage more. I hope we have more of these conversations, David, because there's a lot to unpack in many of these areas. But just let me pull everything together very quickly, and then I'll step back off. We have, as an American society, followed the squirrel, the shiny thing, and we've done really well in Silicon. We have an entire Silicon Valley that shows that we did a great job understanding how to evolve tech and deploy it, and it's awesome. We didn't do such a great job on the defense of that tech, and now our posture has to change, and it's now a known that we have to be more in a defensive posture. Our adversaries have been playing a long game, and there's been an awakening and awareness that we are now at such a detriment that we've got to stop how we've been approaching this, and we've got to level the playing field. And that's going to take a long time because our industrial strength is lacking. But if we're focusing on the defense aspects of all of these sectors, technology just being one of them, but probably the most critical, then we have to focus on that. I'm going to touch on the dual use part. Yes, dual use is absolutely beneficial. And if we're all going to be able to support this together, we've got to have dual use. I'm going to offer a different way to think about it. We focused on enabling for a very long time, and we did really well about that. Now we need to focus on the defense. Let's focus on the defense. Let's make sure that we've got the defensive postures that we need, the positions that we need, the technology that we need in order to enable this Golden Dome concept, like in its truest intent. And then come back to us, these folks here, and we will help the dual use aspect. We will help bring whatever is developed in the defense into the commercial environment in a way that is conducive to fitting in with NASA avionics, the NASA infrastructure and the systems of systems, and meaningfully. Because what I don't want is what we've done forever, which slows us way down, is for us to continue to dilute our roles and continue to take focus on what we're absolutely good at. So those defense guys, you guys, I would offer that you focus on what you do best. And then we will be there to help glean some of that and start translating it into something that can be used commercially. If we're really good at this, then it becomes a self-licking ice cream cone, right? We start developing more technology in the commercial field that we can then feed back to you. But I worry about us having that dual use discussion, that some people take it so literally that they think their business plans need to actually be split in order to have a meaningful ROI. And I don't think that's the case.
That's a good point. And guys, just before we, and then Brandon, I see you got a comment as well, but I want to mention this because this conversation is brilliant. And I think many of us on this panel are going to actually be in person coming up here at the end of the month, right? In the DC area. I wanted to highlight this because I want to meet you guys there in person. The Drone and AAM Policy Symposium with AUVSI, and This Week in Drones is actually a media partner of that event, and we got a $50 off discount code for everybody watching the show. So I wanted to make sure that I got that in your hands. Everyone listening, thank you for listening through all the way here towards the end of this show and being engaged. But I'd love to see you in person. I think Brandon's going to be there. Michelle's going to be there. Robb's going to be there as far as I know. Mariano, I don't know if you were going to make this one or not. I hadn't asked you. But I think it's just going to be brilliant. We're going to connect. We're going to have some conversations. We're going to record some content there. So again, yeah, let's keep this conversation going virtual, but also in person. Use that discount code. Thanks AUVSI as well. So just wanted to add that before we kind of got to the tail end here, but and not to interrupt your comments either, Michelle, that was excellent. And Brandon, I see you came off mute. We got a couple minutes left. So some comments, Brandon, some maybe final comments, Mariano, and then we'll probably need to close.
No, so I just wanted to piggyback on what Michelle was saying, because she alluded to something that's incredibly important, but didn't say it. So I wanted to say it, which is where Michelle and I really fit in, which is we can have all the technology in the world, but if we don't have the policy and processes to enable that technology, nothing's going to happen. I mean, look at the UAS world. We have incredible technology out there, but we don't have the policy, the regulations, the law to enable its use. So Golden Dome can go out there, identify all of these tech and all this great stuff out of Silicon Valley, the disruptors and all these things, but you can't leverage that unless you go through the processes, which I know can be painful sometimes, but they're built based on, unfortunately, and I hate to say this, but blood spill. We make mistakes, people get hurt, a process gets developed to not happen again. The DCA incident's a great example. There's a midair. There's a lot of discussion now on mandating ADS-B for all aircraft, changing the definition of special government mission, all this stuff. But that was a policy change that's being driven by paid in lives. So we have to understand what that technology, what the strategy is, what the capabilities are, and where the policy needs to adapt, change, or whatever to fit in. Because I'll tell you right now, some technology is just not going to work. GPS jamming and interruption inside of the United States is not a thing right now because we are so dependent on it. And ironically, that's the first thing that's probably going to be attacked in a near peer engagement. But that policy has to be intertwined in this every step of the way. And that's, again, where Michelle and I have lived and breathed in the DC environment to know how important that is.
Brandon, really quick, and hopefully if you guys have to drop, we're right on the hour. If you have other meetings, feel free. But Brandon, can you just clarify for everyone listening, is there a advantage to a company to bring on consultants like yourselves
Of course.
early before an incident? But so speak to that briefly. Give me the 30-second commercial of how could it set them apart and be a benefit to them if they bring on that insight before blood is spilled?
Sure. So I mean, I don't want to throw out any company names, but there have been some very early companies in trying to push UAS integration, and they failed miserably. They wasted a lot, hundreds of millions of dollars in VC money because they did not have policy in mind. They're like, we're going to disrupt the aviation industry. You cannot disrupt the aviation industry. It is highly regulated. It is way too, the potential effects are lives. And because of that, you can't disrupt it. And so these disruptors out of Silicon Valley, they have to hire the DC bureaucrats to understand the nuances of that policy to either affect change in policy, not just to get what they want, but to make it smart so that they don't hurt themselves in the long run. But that's incredibly important to bring on folks that have lived the DC policy creation realm to help
They're going to
guide
save
that development.
tons of money, tons of mistakes, and just like, and have way more success. They're going to take off basically if they bring on. I mean, that's brilliant. And then Michelle comment, and then Rob, and then I'll let Mariano close us out.
Very quickly, it's very likely that what you want to use as a disruptor has a connection or a relativity to an existing regulation. And you need somebody that can translate that, because it's much easier to implement something that has a tie to something in existence than it is to implement something that's brand new. So that's the kind of thing that if we could continue to have these conversations, I would love to be able to bring those to light so we can work that from both sides at the same time.
Beautiful. Rob, final thoughts, and then Mariano, and then we'll close out.
Yeah, I appreciate these final comments, and for us, it's clear that resilient, secure connectivity is going to become non-negotiable, especially as it relates to policy. And at TEAL, I'll just close with, we're ready for a policy-aligned deployment of our technology with some of these game-changing developments and technologies that are rapidly being deployed across the world.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Mariano, close us out.
Well, thank you for everyone who's listened and for the panel. I appreciate you guys allowing me to be here and play a small role. At Portal Space Systems, we're excited to help protect and defend from on-orbit adversaries to enable the freedom of space through and in space and around space. But it takes a village, it takes a nation, it takes a lot of private companies that want to do the best for local and local government and big government than the DoD. So I thank everyone who's playing a small role in protecting this great country. I have a lot of pride and gratitude for this nation and for the people that have served and the people that publicly serve that haven't served in the military but love this country as well. So thank you for everyone for the roles that you guys play. We're blessed to live in the best country in the world. And I think that it takes all of us to push the boulder uphill every day and have a smile on our face and do it with gratitude, and we'll be better off as a nation. But thank you for allowing me to be here. I'm humbled, and I appreciate everyone who's listened in.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thanks everyone who's listened and engaged, and we'll see you again next week. Thanks.